All right, I'd like to call this January 17th Unsafe Building Commission meeting work session to order. If we'd please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Roll call, please. Oh, sorry.
Are we doing a roll call?
Yes. Yeah.
We have roll call. Okay. Okay. Ms. Bensauer? Present. Mr. Teal?
Here.
Mr. Beal?
Here.
Mr. Gatto?
Here.
Ms. Abernathy? Present. Mr. Deutmeyer?
Here.
Ms. Heiduch is present.
All right, thank you. All right, so basically, I guess the purpose of canceling this meeting is so we can try to get some ordinances resolved that we may need to take another look at, figure out budgets, and we kind of have a breakdown of the list. I think everybody has one. So well, we're going to kind of pass over on the budget one until Jen gets here. She's going to be about 10 minutes late, give or take. So we'll start out with number 2 with unsafe process and procedures. So Heather, Jeff, you guys both got the emails with all the ordinance stuff and the Tony sent out?
Correct.
All right, okay. All right, I got my stuff in here. So it's my understanding, Heather, you and Tony said that you guys have been in a meeting before where you guys discussed possibly changing procedures roughly a year ago, I think it was.
Did I not wrong about
It was earlier this year.
Earlier this year?
At some point.
So,
because it was when
June?
Donna,
It was in the summer, June, July. It was definitely in the summer.
that could be,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But correct, yes, we met about, correct.
Okay. Now, I'm trying to figure out what, as far as like, with that meeting, when you guys were talking about the procedures and stuff, Tony, I know you mentioned to me that there were stuff in the policies that we could change as far as, was it like more of a fine or something like that?
Yeah, there were fine structures and there were something like 60-day limits, it seems, that people were bound to. I didn't get a chance to go back through this again thoroughly like I did before our meeting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in that unsafe building law that I sent you, and Ryan can probably explain this one a little better because I'm not the legal guy or anything, but
I think overall our goal, which, I mean, you were amazing for even pulling that and pulling the information out of it, was to figure out a way for us, the town, to have more money.
Yes.
To do more smart things.
Yeah.
As far as the unsafe properties went.
well, leverage as well, because when you just tell someone, like wag their finger at them, it's not doing anything.
Correct.
So it seems if there was a fine schedule or something like that, it kind of gets their attention.
Correct, and we, as the Unsafe Building Commission, as far as I know, no one's getting fined for anything.
Right.
So we have code enforcement department that issues fines that eventually can turn into liens and things like that.
Sure.
But the Plan Commission did not have that, and that's what you brought up.
Okay.
Yeah, and Jeff and I are trying to get caught up to speed on this because we only know what we would see from watching meetings and stuff like that.
Right.
You know, none of the other stuff that, as far as funds and stuff like that. You know, Ashley's been filling me in a little bit, Jen has been filling me in a little bit. Actually, I just learned that there was a actual fund way back from around 1970, and now we can't seem to figure out how it came about or where it went.
Right.
So we definitely need to get that figured out. And I agree with Tony, like and you as well, Heather, with the procedures and stuff. Just watching meetings in the past, seeing, somebody comes up here and it's a year and a half, and we're at the same thing. Some of the stuff that if there were fines in place on certain things to start, that maybe they wouldn't even be on the agenda if it were something in conjunction with, unsafe building and ordinance officer going out and saying, hey, the first initial contact in my eyes is, it could avoid a lot of money being spent on stuff, because I looked at the, you know, what we do charge, you know, or what gets charged, I should say. And, you know, and the way I see it is it's costing the town money if we can kind of not have them in front of us right off the bat and try to figure out what's going on first. If there is something simple like the house doesn't have to get torn down, and I know I've mentioned it to a couple of you, I would rather see, you know, if it could be a fine approach, legitimate issue, you know, and then we could impose a fine on them. It would maybe avoid a lot of people coming up here 6 months, 3 months, you know, 30 days extension, 60-day extension, and, you know, they just raked up a few leaves and picked up some boards in the yard, and then another 3 months, you know. So, you know, I've seen the frustration in the past, you know, and kind of got to work together to figure out how we're going to move forward with this.
And if I may, Rich, I also just want to bring up, by no means is this what happened.
Absolutely.
We 100% are trying to move forward.
Exactly.
As a commission.
Yes.
And say, all right, here's our information, here's what we can do, here's our plan.
Yes. Thank you. So now, Tony, so with some of those fines and stuff like that, that is what we would have to get with Ryan then? Is that right, Ryan?
Yeah, and the fine is not something we've done in the past. Just a quick review of the statute here. It looks like it would come under subsection 7, and without knowing specifically that this was something that, you know, was potentially on the table, it probably needs to be looked at a little bit further, but just a quick review shows that there is the possibility of fining someone an amount not in excess of $5,000. But that fine is contingent upon the hearing authority, or you guys, finding that there was a willful failure to comply with an order.
Yeah.
So, to get to that point, we would have already had to have issued the order and the affirmation order, and then the hearing authority would have to find that basically the person didn't comply. In other words, they didn't knock it down, or they didn't remedy the unsafe condition of the property.
Okay.
If I may really quick, or I will forget, should it get that far, or does it need to get that far? Since we do have a code enforcement department.
Yeah, I think that's two separate issues, but it's something that I don't know if there's a way that you can segregate out, you know, code enforcement fines for unsafe conditions versus other things.
Well, that's where my thought is, though. I mean, I'm not talking about, you know, roofs caving in, you know, it's, you know, house needs to come down, you know, because it is that unsafe. A lot of the stuff that I was reading through and then flipping back through the AIM slideshow and stuff like that, kind of cross-referencing stuff, just what they would call the blighted and stuff like that.
Yeah.
To me, it's more unsightly.
Sure.
And so that, to me, doesn't need to be in front of the board if it can be handled that way. And then if it is something that leads into unsafe, then I would say, by all means, that there would be the order to appear and stuff like that in front of the board.
Yes, I think what you're talking about is the ones that are maybe teetering towards unsafe but aren't there yet.
Yes.
And those are the ones that you want to target for potentially fining and allocating those fines to the unsafe sort of department. And then once they get here, I mean, I don't know if we just look at sort of what's happened in the past. I would say the overwhelming majority of properties that have gotten to the point where unsafe orders have been issued, odds of you recovering any fine from those property owners are probably slim to none.
Yeah.
But if you're targeting those properties before they get to unsafe to try to keep them, number one, off the unsafe list, and number two, to sort of add some money to the coffers here, I think that's something that certainly could be done under other provisions of the town code, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's my thought, is we all know how it starts. It starts with a, you know, unkept exterior and things like that. Those would fall under code enforcement issues, correct?
Correct.
So if that
Or
would
under
be,
zoning code, you know, various
Yeah.
other provisions.
so if those, I mean, ultimately, I'd love this not to exist. You know what I mean? Like, in a perfect world, but isn't there things that we can be catching at an earlier time that might fall under code enforcement where they're getting fined and eventually cleaning up whatever they have to clean up, or saying, you know what, maybe I need to sell my property, or whatever the case is, before it ends up at a point where, of the properties that we have on our list now.
Yeah, I mean, I sit through the town court proceedings every other month, and I was there last night. We had 9 bench trials set and 8 of them were for, it's not the same issue, but for abandoned vehicles, right, for example. So the town has targeted those particular items, which are generally fairly easy to identify, right? Somebody doesn't have current tags on their car. And those folks, they're getting multiple fines and multiple court cases. And those are the types of things that can sort of accumulate and that you can sort of nip in the bud, right? Some of those people come in, it's like, hey, we sold the car, we updated the tags, whatever. And that's ultimately sort of drawing a parallel here to what we have going on. That's kind of what you want, right? You want somebody to go out there and be like, oh, the roof's been tarped up for a year, like, fix it.
Yes.
Before something bad happens to the house and it
Right.
ends up here. And I think that is certainly a way to sort of gain compliance there from some of the folks.
So, if I may, there was a webinar that Jason and I had done on code enforcement for, that had to do sort of with this matter. The IPMC, which is the International Property Management Code, deals with exactly that, which unfortunately Indiana has not adopted. But if you were to look over that International Property Management Code, it might give you some ideas on, it's just that, to keep basically people from letting things just become dilapidated. You have 5 pieces of siding missing and now you've got shingles blowing off and things start to just go downhill, and if they can nip it and keep it from even becoming unsafe. I had Ashley look and see if that was even something that we could do, but Indiana has not adopted it, so that's kind of out of the question. But it is something that is, other states use it.
Probably the easiest tool at your disposal when it comes to enforcing some of these issues against property owners is just the general nuisance code, right? One of the criteria that you'll go through is, it's a nuisance because, it's open, it attracts varmin, this, that, and the other thing. And the town has nuisance provisions, Indiana State Code has nuisance provisions, those things can be enforced, and those can be assessed fines under, the ordinance violations that could be used. That's sort of a different story as to how that money gets allocated, but, if, person A, John Doe, gets charged with a nuisance and pays, the $100 fine or $150 fine, whatever it is, that money could be set aside and, sent to the Unsafe Building Commission.
Yeah. But in light of, that would basically take away from them being in front of us under the current the way it's currently written.
Yeah, you would hope that
Right,
you
Yeah.
get attention to the issues before they become substantial enough that, the roof has fallen in or
Yeah.
something
Well,
like
it
that.
also creates a level of expectation. Our town isn't a garbage bag. So our expectation is that you maintain your property and do these certain things. Or if you drive by 15 of them to go home every day and that's all you're seeing, eventually that's what happens.
And I think, again, to draw the parallel back to town court last night, that's sort of why the target, at least for code enforcement in a lot of circumstances, has been like unsafe or abandoned vehicles, right? There's cars sitting up on cinder blocks that, aren't operable or don't have current tags or something like that, and those are, the goal is to eliminate that, right? So you're trying to nip that in the bud, and you might as well add, unsafe properties, and there are other areas of the town or other components that can be cleaned up in the same fashion. Is it 100% no, but, does it have some success? Absolutely.
Okay. Do we want to stick with this, or we want to go to budget real quick since Janet's here?
Well, I guess to go along with that, so what do we have to do to make that happen?
How do you mean?
Well,
Like to actually enforce it?
right. I'd love to talk about it, but how do we do it? What do we have to do next to make that happen?
Are those discussions you have with your code enforcement officer? Do you have somebody else whose, sole responsibility, I guess, or additional responsibility is to go out and to target, these sort of nuisance properties for, fines and citations? That's sort of a policy.
Well, what's
decision.
under our umbrella now for the code enforcement department? I know they're looking for grass. They're probably
It's
looking
all
for...
grass and weeds, although not this time of the year.
And abandoned vehicles.
Yeah,
We
a
still
lot
have
of
code
abandoned
enforcement.
vehicles.
We still have a code enforcement department, right?
They do function under the police department, and it is a part-time employee.
So how many hours does that person work?
I think
Traditionally, no more than 25 per week, because it is a part-time position.
It wasn't though, correct?
No, as long as that employee, as far as I'm aware, that specific position has been part-time since it was brought back.
21?
Bob would know, Bob.
That's part-time.
It's always been part-time, huh? I know we didn't have it
I
forever.
think we had a little period where it wasn't, part-time, but then we let that person go, and then they brought her back.
Part-time,
Right.
got it, that's what I'm thinking, okay. So, I mean, there's another question.
Yeah.
Look, driving around our town, how on earth don't we have a full-time code enforcement department? I mean, looking around and seeing the insane amount of properties that look horrible, how is that not a thing?
Well,
Who do I look at?
part of it was done with the police
I know.
department. The police department, the code enforcer, but police department also, wrote citations out there. Just beside-
Aren't they busy enough, Bob?
Yeah, but
Police in our town?
they did that, they've done some of that too.
Should that be their job in a town like this that has so many issues?
Seems like if it's not a complaint that they're addressing, I don't really know that they have I don't wanna say the skill, but, I mean, the discernment, I mean, they've got enough to do.
That's my point, if
Yeah.
they're busy enough.
Right, unless it's a direct call, hey, my neighbor's this or that.
How can we not justify a full-time code enforcement officer, or, I'm sorry, I don't know the correct term, a full-time code enforcement person? Aren't they collecting enough fines to justify that? They can be, I can drive around all day and point out.
Now, when it comes, my understanding is when it comes to code enforcement on the PD side and collection of fines, I mean, a lot of times it takes years to collect anything, and when they do actually go to court, a lot of times that stuff's pretty much written off. You're not collecting anything back. I don't even think we would be making enough back to justify the time for that employee to go to court.
I just don't know how I can drive around any other town locally and not see the amount of properties that I see here. Is that true, that those fines just get kind of written off or thrown in the garbage?
I can't tell you the frequency that they're paid. I would tell you that non-moving violations, for example, your abandoned vehicles or your general nuisance claims, would not result in a license suspension typically, which is usually sort of the biggest leverage point you have when it comes to drivers that, you know, get convicted of a moving violation, speeding, running a traffic light or something. If they don't pay it, they're gonna have their license suspended for 3 months. Non-movers, because some folks downstate changed the law within the last 12 to 24 months, and they know better than the locals when it comes to these things, have made it the policy of the state not to suspend folks for those types of violations. So that eliminates one leverage point you have. But the other leverage point that you would have in terms of this is if you're nailing a property owner, right? If John Doe owns a property that's dilapidated and you hit him with a nuisance complaint and he is not paying that fine, you get another one and he's not paying it, what you can do, since they are civil judgments, is you can enforce them in the same way you would enforce a civil judgment. In other words, you could file a foreclosure action against the property to try to foreclose on that and collect. Now, policy question for the policymakers is, you know, does the return justify the cost expenditure in doing so? You know, if you have $300 in fines because John Doe doesn't maintain his property, do you want to go through the cost and expense of running title work, which in and of itself is going to cost more than the fine, to try to foreclose on the property?
Well, I don't think these are $300 fines that I understand and appreciate the foreclosure process, but those aren't $300 fine properties.
No.
Those would be properties that are on our list.
And that's, I think, what my thought is, if there's any way we can have some type of a separation before, actual unsafe buildings versus more or less code violations, on having a more clearer separation of the two, so we're not, loaded up with all the ones that are on here that are just more cosmetic versus actual unsafe.
And
I
that
think
kind of
that-
goes to the code enforcement issue that's sort of hovering over all of this is, do you want to allocate that to your current code enforcement officer, or is there money in the budget somewhere that you could use to either take somebody from a different department and have them do that 3 days a week, or is that a new position that's created solely for doing this, sort of in the same fashion that code enforcement operates under the PD umbrella? You could have someone sort of theoretically operating under like the building department umbrella that is only looking for these types of violations.
So could it be more of like with code enforcement as being instructed as far as what to look for? I guess
It could be, I don't know with 20 some odd hours, 25 hours tops, I don't know what the hours that remain in a given day are
Yeah,
for that individual.
My idea is not to create another position and spend more money.
Right.
My thought is, how do we work smarter and figure out a way for the staff that we already have
I think there's ways.
to bring...
We were going to, when we got rid of the code enforcer, on the police department side, we wanted to go ahead and have the planning department take over code enforcing. And then one of the council members, John Foreman, came back and suggested that we bring the code enforcer back, and then that happened.
I don't think the code enforcer is a bad idea,
right.
and I don't know how to split up the work. All I'm saying is that we as a plan commission, or excuse me, wrong meeting, we as an unsafe commission need some sort of funds, so when it is time to demo these properties that need to be demoed, we have that money. So how can we figure out the best way to get that without spending more of the town's money?
I think Bob just kind of hit it on the head, which was what the theory was when the code enforcement was eliminated, and that is reassigning that to someone in the building department. If you have an employee within the building department that can allocate those hours, or multiple employees, divvy it up on, on a weekly basis, that can devote, a day or two to going out and issuing these citations, and that's certainly something that I think should be on the table. But again, that's higher level policy making decision as to how they want to move those folks around.
Who's they?
Town council?
Yeah.
Is
I
there
don't
any,
think this board has the power to.
Oh, I know I have no power. That's not my point at all. I'm just trying to figure out who to talk to.
Yeah.
is there any state or federal grants that would be available that we could apply for to?
They exist. I haven't found anything recently. The last one I found that they did this for was 2019, and they were federal. And the one thing when it comes to federal grants is that they're not set up to go to specific either municipalities or tribal units by themselves. They get funneled to the state, and then it's where the states then allocate them at the end. If they allocate them to planning organizations, for example, Lake County, Porter County, and LaPorte fall under NERC, which is the Northwest Indiana Regional Planning Committee. It's where that funds get to, and they get, when it gets to federal, if they're not funneled that way, you're then competing with every municipality and city within all 50 states, and are we going to be able to get that grant money?
So probably not.
Yeah, I think it's the same issue that Gary's dealt with for years, right? We all know the state of Gary and the state of a lot of the buildings in that town, and the town or the city just doesn't have the money to knock them down. So they just sit there and continue to deteriorate.
Not that I think we're on our way to being Gary, but driving around this town, I've lived here since, Broken Crown Point, lived here since 2009. I mean, it's bad. I don't want to see it get worse.
Mm-hmm.
So, Tony, I guess maybe you're a good person to ask this question to, since there's no one else here. From the building, well, it's the building department in general, I mean, how, do these guys have time?
Depends on the day, the week, the month, the season. Right now, yes. July, maybe not. So it really, I mean, we have no way to control how much
Yeah.
work we have per day. We may be loaded and we may be staring at each other, honestly, driving around looking for dumpsters, work happening that's not supposed to be, things of that nature, which, I mean, it gives us time to do that, which is great. And in the busy days, busy times, we don't. Which would be the same thing with any kind of code enforcement inspections or anything like that.
So is it feasible for you as a department to say, by no means do I want to add work to your workload, but during those times that you are driving around,
Yeah.
to
I
teach
think
the
so.
department to say, you know what, here's other things we can be looking for.
Right.
We're looking for dumpsters, we're looking for workers, contractors, permits not outside, and also boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
Like in 2021, we had 396 new home permits, so they were busy then. Then it went down to 245 in '22, and we only issued 159 for 2023, which we anticipated 200, but we didn't get it.
Right.
Yeah, and I know you guys are busy, but I think, you know, if you are driving around, and everyone is driving around looking for those, which, great, I'm glad that you're doing that,
Right.
is there things that we can add to that list?
I think so.
To
Yeah, as
keep-
long as we have some sort of structure, I guess, so it's consistent. You know, so we're looking for the same things throughout any neighborhood. And I guess it doesn't look like some situation or some person or some neighborhood is being targeted, something like that.
Yeah.
And then
So, yeah.
having a policy or ordinance in place will help cover if that angry person calls and says, why did I get this? Well, because of ordinance so-and-so, you met criteria X, Y, and Z, therefore this is why you got fine so-and-so. Because then when, for example, when I send out a violation from the zoning ordinance, I can put in that letter exactly where the ordinance allows me to send you that fine. And that's Chapter 19, Section F, items 1 and 2, zoning ordinance 1402, Chapter 19, Section F. That's the part that has penalties and fines. That one set up to a $25 to a $2,500 fine based on the level of infractions. And every new day, it can be counted as a new infraction. So I have that ordinance that can then back up why that fine was given to that person.
So Ryan, I guess the question for you then is how the Unsafe Commission does not have a budget at this time, correct?
My understanding is that I think there's a limited budget, but I don't know what specifics are of the budgeting for the Unsafe Commission.
So my question is, if we do something like that, and there are fines that are associated with some sort of an unsafe ordinance that we could put together, could those fines then be in the unsafe, like an unsafe account, that therefore when we needed to demolish a
I think you
property?
need to ask Jennifer.
Yeah, that's probably above my pay grade.
And to me, that would go along with item one.
He's a
item-
lawyer, isn't he the person?
Well, item one and item three about creating the unsafe non-reverting fund, but that would have to come from council direction with an ordinance and stuff.
Yes, because currently any ordinance violations, any fines or fees received get put directly back into the general fund. So for anything to go to unsafe specifically, I would say when you are brainstorming the type of ordinance you want, and it goes back to council for ultimate council approval, within that ordinance, you want to have the establishment of an unsafe non-reverting fund and specify, like we've done with other non-reverting funds, that any fines, fees, whatever related to, you know, however you structure that, shall be receipted into, you know, an unsafe non-reverting fund to be created by the clerk treasurer, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. We've got templates because we've done it in the past for other non-reverting funds, but then that way we can specifically create a revenue code, and anytime any fines are receipted, it'll go directly into that fund.
So how does the general fund now decide when they're giving money to the unsafe building commission and when they're not.
So
And how
current-
much as well.
So
Right.
currently, unsafe is a function of the planning, zoning, and building department. So if you look under PZB's budget, there are line items, there's a supply line item, and there is a services line item. And it's, when you add it up together, I think it's around 12,000 between the two lines.
For the year,
11.5?
between all three.
Two lines, supplies and service.
No, between planning, BZA, and unsafe.
No. There are specific appropriations for unsafe supply and unsafe services. So PZB generally doesn't touch that. It's all related to unsafe. In the past, like last year, the services line item was used when we demolished the house on 141st Avenue. Far more of the, the 30-yard roll-offs were needed for that project, and those are $300 a pop. So we had to pay for that additional out of there. Anytime there's title work related to unsafe, gets paid out of there. Any miscellaneous services like that.
So there was a lien on the property, I assume? Did we put a lien on that property when we took the property, when the,
Not that I'm aware of.
Which one are you talking about?
the 141st, just for example?
Bird property?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
The bird property was, the major complication there was we got stuck in a dual path with the bank. And the bank was always gonna win that fight. Because their mortgage lien is gonna be superior
It's
to.
supersedes, yeah, I get it. So, okay, so generally speaking, if a property comes down, if we choose to demolish it, we put a lien on the property, correct?
Correct.
Have we ever received funds back from any of those, where it's been sold and something else, and then we get our money back?
In the history of my time with the town, I have never seen a receipt for a lien related to an unsafe building. The only liens that I have seen receipts for are the sewer utility liens we place on utility billing.
That's probably true. I mean, the one that I can think of, the one shining example that we had knocked down and leaned up, the problem with that one, and I assume probably others, is that it just becomes a vacant piece of land, and the owners don't want to pay taxes, or they die, and they end up at tax sale. And the one that I know for sure of, that we had knocked it down, ended up getting sold at tax sale, and.
And then we lose out
Mhm.
that way.
Yeah, with taxes first, and if there's anything left over, it come to us, but not
And there's
$8,000
not usually much left over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When in reality, though, that person could have probably sold that property for $25,000, whether it's
Correct,
just
and that
land.
one, it wasn't all that far from the lake. Now, that was the way things were used to be handled. Now, again, this goes back to what we had talked about before with the fines, right? You have a lien on the property, it's a policy call. If the policy is you want to prosecute those to get that money back, then you go and foreclose the lien. Now, some of them, we're always going to run into the bank issues, right? And then if that's the case, I think our advice would probably uniformly be it's not worth it because
Right.
the bank's going to be first. But if there's a property without a mortgage, go and foreclose it.
Because then we're first in line,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I mean,
That's never been a directive to us, which probably part of the reason why that money's never come in. It's just basically, my understanding of the way things were handled in the past is we've done, I went through the hassle of getting our form approved by the State Board of Accounts probably 5 or 6 years ago, give or take. And that allows us to sort of abbreviate a lien process. So we don't have to like file a lawsuit, it's just basically, it's a sworn statement that now Tony would sign, that we file, they have 30 days to respond. If they don't do anything, a judgment's entered. Then you could foreclose on it the same way, but basically the way things were always done is the liens were put into place and then it was out of sight, out of mind, that was it.
how quickly from the time that we would place a lien, say no mortgage, no bank involved, we place the lien to the time that we would get our money back on that?
And you gotta foreclose on it, so you're talking, you gotta file the foreclosure lawsuit. You'd have to notice everybody up, get a default judgment, assuming nobody appeared, 60 days-ish for a default judgment, plus you gotta notice it up for a sheriff's sale and do all of that. So you're talking another probably 60 or 90 days on top of that.
So 4 months plus, at least.
I would say. to get through the courts to,
Ish.
Well, 4 months is better than never.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And I'm-
assuming, of course, nobody showed up, which you don't know.
And there again, maybe a lot of legal costs that will be involved, and then in turn, you may not even, get anything from the courts. We may just be out the legal fees we had to pay.
Well, if you foreclose on it, then you sell it, and then you have the profit from it.
But Ryan, it's not always that we're going to get, the foreclosure in our favor, right?
If we're first in
Well, I mean,
line,
sure.
if there's not a bank involved, and we're first in line for it, then yeah, we would get the funds from it.
Less your expenses, right? Because
Right.
we don't have a contract with them to be able to recover attorney's fees and all that stuff.
Sure, but so we pay that, and still,
I mean, for knowing what sort of the hourly rates are, it would have to be a lot of attorney's fees for you to sort of totally offset the foreclosure amount. I mean, assuming it's like an $8,000, lien, which is what a lot of these were in the past. And just, sort of forward thinking, the first few that you would encounter are gonna be sort of the ones that are gonna take more time as we develop sort of the forms for it. Once that is done, then it's, foreclosure attorneys, if you look at the firms that handle them for the bank, I mean, they foreclose on bank loans all the time, and they're handling them for a couple $1,000s, because everything is just so form-based.
yeah.
that You're just changing names, changing addresses, changing legal descriptions, serving people, and then it's just boom, 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 knock them out.
I guess I'm just trying to figure out how we transition from current list that we have, to where we are today, with putting everybody on hold with this, and not kicking the can down the road until we get our, stuff straight. I'm trying to figure out how we do that as a process of continuing on, but still trying to get all that stuff in place without pushing this stuff on the back burner for who knows how long it's gonna take to implement policy, ordinance, and stuff like that.
I mean, I think the first step is to the building department, it is the winter, like you said, it is a little bit slower now. If there is time for that right now, and we at least start implementing fines, that at least gives us revenue coming in. Of course,
I
it's
mean,
gonna take a
the
while.
caveat is, you need to get sort of the fund established and the ordinance in place to allocate the fine amounts
Yeah.
for that particular violation
Correct.
to the building department. If Tony went out and wrote a bunch of citations for nuisance tomorrow, and we prosecuted him in town court in March, I mean, that money, I think, is just gonna end up
It's
back in
gonna
the
go
general.
right back to the general fund until there's an ordinance in place.
Right, but I mean, how long does that take?
I mean, it shouldn't take long, assuming, again, that's a town council question.
Right.
If the council's directive is to get that stuff established, it could probably be done relatively
In
quickly.
the next month?
That might be a little aggressive,
Well,
but
I
I
know,
would still
if-
think it's still gonna be a couple of meetings though, wouldn't it?
I would tend to
in
agree
theory?
with that, yeah.
First initial discussion on it, voting on it, getting it drawn up, instructing legal to write it up.
I'm just a doer, there's gotta be a.
Well,
good way to
I
do
know,
it.
but I'm
Like,
just saying
it's crazy.
in all actuality, what's the quickest an ordinance can be put through?
And part of your question has to be, does this commission want say-so over the body, the text, whatever that goes into it? Because if the answer is yes, our next meeting's in February, right? So that's part of the lead time that you'd be dealing with.
And I would say, I'd want some kind of a say as an unsafe building, or we're no better off than where we may currently be. Does that make sense with that, or?
The only other thing that, as we sit here and sort of talk about it, the one violation that really jumps out at me is the general nuisance, right? Maybe it's just a simple reallocation of the fines related to general nuisance going to the Unsafe Building Commission versus dropping it in the general fund where they, I presume, currently go. And just, by the way, having done Cedar Lake Town Court for many years now, general nuisance claims are not frequently used.
What do you mean they're not frequently used?
It's not a violation that really ever ends up in town court.
Because they get paid,
No, because they're never written.
because they're never written. So, well, I mean, that's a start.
Yeah.
If that's something we can do to start until we can meet 2 more times or whatever we need to do, that at least gives us a beginning of a way to put that general nuisance umbrella into the unsafe fund until we can work out all the details of the rest.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a decent starting point. It's just
That's a great starting point.
something to use. I mean, that is probably the easiest town code provision to use for these items, because as we talked about before, if you look at any of these unsafe reports that Tony writes, one of the, like, 5 or 6 criteria is that it's a nuisance, right? And that is, it's kind of a squishy definition as to what constitutes a nuisance, but, you know, if it is violative of the sort of the community standards, you know, it's offensive to the sights and smells and sounds of the local neighbors and things like
Let's
that.
say if it degrades the value of the property
Yeah.
around.
Yeah,
Which is, I mean, that is,
safe,
it's as generic as it gets.
Yeah,
but it's safe.
yeah. If you have the worst house on the block, you are degrading the value of the other homes. I mean,
Yeah, and
that's the way we're buying.
these aren't older, worst house in the best block. These aren't older homes, these are homes that are unsafe. These are homes that have, like you said, siding's blown off of them, half of the roof shingles are blown off, haven't been taken care of, unsightly, animals living either inside it or around it.
Garden hoses in their windows.
Garden hoses in their windows, things of that nature. So, I mean, I like that plan to start with. Gives us a starting point. It gives us a fund.
Again, once the town council does it,
Yeah.
right? It's not something that we can start tomorrow, because
Well, they have a meeting in 2 weeks, correct?
my belief right now is that a general nuisance is just gonna fall into the general fund.
Yeah, I'd have to, I mean, who knows when that original ordinance was, I'd have to pull it to read that one. But yeah, primarily, everything just gets receipted back into the general fund unless it's tied to an ordinance for a specific non-reverting fund that was created for whatever specific purpose.
So we'd have to create that fund then too, right?
Town council does.
Create a
Town council would.
We're giving them the directive
Correct.
to create a non-diverting fund for the unsafe building commission.
From general nuisance fines.
Starting with fines for general nuisance, written by,
So if I may, what I would say is Rich and Bob can go back to council and kind of explain the conversation that's happened here tonight and kind of the way you want to go, because you're actually going to have 2 ordinances here right off the bat.
Mhm.
You need an ordinance to establish the unsafe non-reverting fund, but then you're actually going to have an amendment to whatever the original ordinance was that established the nuisance violations and how they're receipted. That will need to be updated in order to say that anything written for a nuisance violation, whatever that code is, 70-2690- whatever, because that's usually what it looks like. I don't know what the specific one is, but we'll start doing some digging tomorrow. That ordinance will have to be amended to say that specific violation, any receipts for it are then turned around and deposited into the non-reverting fund as opposed to currently the general fund.
those 2 can go hand in hand though, correct?
They're 2 separate ordinances.
Correct, but they can be proposed and taken care of at the same time? Or do we have to go through the process for the whole first thing and then amend it and do it all over again?
So that's what Rich and Bob will need to talk with the council about, and then that's what council will need to direct to the attorney's office. Okay, this is what we're looking for, please draft it, and then, we'd like to see it within X amount of time.
And the ordinance that's on the book will have to be amended first, and then we create the other ordinance.
Since I have 4 town council members here tonight, can we all agree this is,
We can't
No.
have...
Mission critical.
Yeah, you can only ask 3.
can I ask 3 of the town council people here tonight? I mean, this is a critical thing, this is important.
I think that has to
Yeah.
wait until the
Yeah, I think-
seven of us are
Yeah.
together.
That warrants discussion.
As a whole.
People.
Is that next Tuesday when the meeting is?
We are meeting on the 23rd,
We
Yeah,
have-
that'll be
but,
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are special meetings. We've
so
got-
technically no then.
Well, I mean, if we still have a report section, then you guys can bring it up under town council reports. Hey, at the last Unsafe, this is what we discussed, this is what we'd like to see, and then one of you makes a motion to, you know, start the ball rolling, however you so choose to do that.
So not by next month.
But
We'll get done.
So my question then is, how do we, what's the best route for us to proceed with the current active unsafe and stuff like that? Because I know, you know, the awaiting demolition are still gonna be awaiting demolition, but, the ones that are on active right now, from where we are today to proceed, I mean, we can still have next month's meeting as would have been normally scheduled for this month, while we're doing a work in progress on changing, or is that gonna be messing things up?
No, I don't think it would. I don't have the list in front of me, but I feel like things sort of slowed
Well, I
at the
see
end of
12
the
of
year
them on
last
there.
year.
Yeah, I see 12 of them on there.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, in terms of sort of some of the pushing that was done by this commission towards the end of the year last year, so I don't believe we have any in which there are demolition orders entered on, and frankly, I don't think there's any in which demolition orders have even been contemplated on as of yet, other than the ones that are currently pending.
The initial demolition order for the house on 138th.
Okay, so outside of that one.
I will interject though and also say that the reason that the demo orders weren't issued is because we weren't gonna be able to demo.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'm not
Not
casting
because they
any
didn't need it.
aspersions here.
Right.
Not because they didn't need it,
Yeah,
but what's the point?
but to answer your question, if the things can still proceed, yes. I mean, I don't think there's any reason to slow the path of progress. You can still bring these folks in, and obviously, maybe the three of you have a different viewpoint on what can be done, what should be done versus what last year's commission was, and those are discussions that you are free to have with these property owners to try to gain compliance through a method other than fining or knocking it down, right? Because something within this board's sort of purview is to bring these folks in and to say, you know, as Heather well knows, it's what's going on, what do you intend to do, and how are you gonna do it, what's your timeline? And those
I
are
also
still
get
discussions.
complaints on the one at 129th and Hilltop, which got on the unsafe building. The guy signed it over for us to tear it down. It's got busted out windows, it's got cinder blocks that's holding up the, west side of the building and looks like it's about ready to pop out.
It does. I drove past it today.
Yeah,
It looks like it's ready to go
And I'm
over.
getting complaints from the residents, why aren't we doing that? Because the guy signed off on tearing it down.
What's your response, Bob?
I said, we don't have funds. From what I've been told.
No, that's the truth. And that's everywhere. We can drive around here for a day and pick out all the ones that need to be taken down.
Let's do a field trip.
I'd rather not, frankly. Depressing. I see enough driving to my own home. So, the next step is to direct, or hope to direct, the council to create an unsafe, non-reverting fund with specific direction, which we also need the ordinance, and then another ordinance.
Yes, you need the creation, and then you need to amend the nuisance ordinance, putting those fines into the unsafe funds.
So nothing can happen,
Money-wise, until that happens.
Yeah, you need the mechanism and the specific violation to sort of go hand in hand. Otherwise, Tony could write 100 nuisance violations tomorrow, and all that money goes into general.
I appreciate the process, I just think there has to be an easier way than to say it's gonna take months. That confuses me. Is there no way to make this process more efficient?
I mean, the decision on that has to come from the council. That's the big delay. So let's say, if you want to shrink your timeline down, the council meets next week, right? That discussion occurs, the council says, this is something we want to do. They direct us to prepare it. And when's your meeting in February?
February 21st.
No, not this meeting, the council
Oh.
meeting in February.
February 6th.
Sixth is the first one, and then whatever that,
20th?
yeah, I think, 20.
So I mean, that would potentially be your earliest possible target date.
That's a month. That's okay. Months doesn't sound great.
But they are aware, you know, that I was talking with you guys, you know, Jeff and yourself, and I spoke with Tony a number of times, Ashley, Ryan's office on the process of getting that stuff going. But we need to have this meeting. I need to bring it, you know, along with Bob to the council. Like you said, with the process, we need to do that first. Yeah, I mean, and the majority of them know what's already going on. So it's not like I have to explain from scratch, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, yeah. So that's the starting point, to create all of that, and then to see the general nuisance fines go into that fund. Is that I mean, I would like to discuss the foreclosure option as well. I think that that's a smart avenue.
Yeah, I think that really probably comes sort of case by case, because it's going to depend upon what the title work shows on each particular property.
Sure.
But, you know, once one is knocked down, and we are going to have title on it, because we'll have known, because we had to notify everyone, it's, you know, there's a mortgage on this or there isn't. You know, or, you know, this person's got, you know, federal tax liens or something else that's going to throw a monkey wrench in it, or, you know, it's relatively clear. And some of these orders that we've done in the past, title's reasonably clear on it. I mean, there might be some judgments from a few years back or something, but those folks probably aren't going to contest foreclosure. So, yeah, it's just that, I think that is just got to be evaluated with each and every one. And those are evaluations that can kind of occur while we're going through the unsafe process. It's, you know, here's who we have to notify, and, you know, is this one that could be worth foreclosing on once everything's done, assuming they don't pay.
All right. And then I want to ask Jen again, back to like the budget and with this fund, that's something though, if it comes out of general fund right now, by creating those funds and then the ordinance for general nuisance, I don't want to wait however long it takes if there's, you know, $100 fine, $150 fine, until you get enough funds to tear one down, because we're no better off than where we currently are. So that would almost, creating that non-reverting fund, be able for us or me to direct counsel on actually having a budgetary item going into that fund?
So traditionally non-reverting funds, you don't have a set budget for it because you don't have a set revenue source. Your revenue source is those fines and fees, and
Yeah.
I mean, we can estimate how many violations we think Tony will write, you know, within a month, within 3 months, but you can't bank on that. It's a non-reverting fund. So what council will need to decide, and this is in conjunction with conversations with Unsafe, is, well, there's two things that I think that need to be discussed, because the birdhouse last year, that was done by Operations Director and Public Works. So a majority of all of that was based on Public Works stuff. A couple of things were paid out of that unsafe services line that I was telling you about a little bit ago, but the equipment, other miscellaneous supplies like stone or dirt, things like that, that all came from Public Works coffers. So what council needs to realize is if it's done in-house, it's not just touching the little bit of general. You're actually taking from Public Works budget. So that's something that council needs to be aware of because Public Works budget is primarily motor vehicle highway and local roads and streets. And they're not like the general fund. They don't have cushy cash balances to, you know, kind of help them along. We get distributions from the state monthly with MVH and LRS. So we're pretty much working on a month-to-month basis and we're watching our cash flow. Because the thing that worries me is because last year when the birdhouse came down, the equipment that was used to take that property down needed over $10,000 in repairs as soon as that project was done. And that was all on Public Works, came out of their budget. And that was pretty much all of their budget that remained for the year by the time that happened. So council needs to decide, along with Unsafe, if this is going to, you know, the ones that actually need to be demolished, if it's going to continue being an in-house kind of service, or if the council chooses to prioritize it, make it part of the budget for the ensuing years, and what kind of budget is that going to look like? You know, how do we, I mean, because I feel like the birdhouse is kind of a special house, so I don't know if that's the same amount that's going to take to, you know, tear down every one that needs to be torn down. Like, what's the actual cost you're looking at? We need some sort of estimate to work off of in order to budget for future years, and then to say, okay, we're going to budget this amount because we think it'll cover, you know, this many that need to come down, but we're going to outsource it. So we're not taking away from, you know, those budgets.
So what you just said there, I was not aware that after they tore the birdhouse down, it cost $10,000 to repair equipment at the Public Works?
Yep.
And that's not good because we need to maintain these roads in town.
Well, I mean, Bob, to be a devil's advocate here, something could have broken down at any point, at any time. So, I mean.
Which is true, yeah.
At the end of the day, it was for the town's good to have it wasn't like, great, no, but things happen.
I mean, if it was a piece of equipment on a third party tearing the house down, that doesn't get transferred over to the bill.
Right,
You know, that's just cost of business.
right.
And at what point, so when I was looking through the slide for the AIM on Unsafe, where it had the differentiate between up to 10,000, you can do it in-house, over 10,000, you bid it out. Can we, on all of them, even if it would be 8,000, bid it out if it's gonna run into issues with Public Works then?
Yeah, I have the provision here. Okay, it says the work may be performed by a contractor who's been awarded a base bid contract to perform the work for the enforcement authority or by the department acting units enforcement authority. So, you don't have to necessarily go through the same bidding process. You can do it through just a base bid, but yes, you can have your list of contractors.
It doesn't have to be over 10,000.
Correct.
Small garage, $3,000, we can still bid it out.
Yeah, if you wanted to. I mean, it's all sort of hovers back to the same question of money, right? And maybe it's an allocation question, but if you have $10,000 in your fund for the year, you're gonna bid it out to someone and they're gonna knock down a house and there's your entire budget for the year.
Yeah, and I mean, in the case of Public Works with that equipment breaking, any kind of demolition work is gonna be more of a toll than they're digging a hole because they're doing a water line, you know, in my eyes. So, you know, I don't know if that's something that we really strongly consider just doing nothing but bidding them out when we are gonna tear it down, just to save on that from ever happening again.
Yeah, agreed. That was out of necessity.
Absolutely. Right,
It shouldn't be out of necessity.
right.
I agree. I think they should be bid out. I think our guys are busy enough. I think our equipment's being used enough. It could probably use better.
But, I mean, demo work, I mean, it's more abuse than if they were, you know, fixing a broken water main.
Right.
All right. I think number 4 kind of tied in with some of the other discussions as well. So, trying to keep a track on time so we don't run past.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, and shame on me for not knowing that. I understand how properties get on the list. Someone calls and makes a complaint, or someone drives by and staff employees drives by and sees an issue, and they end up on our list. But can you narrow down to me how, if 50 calls come in, how at that point do those become active? Or potentially unsafe?
So if we get a call, I pass me or any of the other ladies in the building department, we take down the address, we get it to Tony, and say, Tony, we got a call about a potentially unsafe house or structure. When you have the opportunity, could you please go by and take a look? When Tony gets the opportunity based on workload of the day, he'll go by, he'll take a look and say, yes, it is unsafe, and he'll start his process of taking pictures and getting the report, in which case, once that's ready, I can then get it on the unsafe agenda as a potentially unsafe, and then the board then determines whether or not they feel it's unsafe or not, or Tony comes back and says, well, it's not the prettiest house on the block, it's not necessarily unsafe.
And that's when it might fall under the general nuisance.
That's the saying, that should be sort of the trigger, is if we have that circumstance and Tony's out there and says, this isn't unsafe, the same day you're writing a ticket for a nuisance violation.
So, but my list, I mean, I think I came on the board last, I don't know, it's not been a year yet.
January.
Has it been a year?
Yeah.
Happy anniversary. Question is, I have to assume there are more than what I've ever seen on a list. So who decides, if Tony goes out in a month and does, I don't know, 5 or whatever, different site checks, reports, who decides at that point what I'm seeing on my paper in front of me? Because it's never been, as long as I've been on, me. Who decides that?
Part of it is Tony and I will talk about it and decide which is the one that is the worst out of all of them. Part of it is I will talk with whoever is the unsafe chairperson and say, this is what we have. Do you want any or all of them? And that chairperson who has final say over what goes on the agenda tells me, add none of them, add all of them, because ultimately, at the end of the day, any agenda that gets sent out, the chairperson or president, depending on the board, has final say over what goes on that agenda.
I believe that was why the newest 4 or so got added on there. Colleen wanted
I think 5.
some fresh properties added on there. So they had been in the unsafe folder. The report's done for, that's why.
That's why that guy was up here saying the
That's
report
why
was
he
like
was
from
complaining.
2022 or something.
Yeah, because they had been sitting in there because the meetings were busy enough that really couldn't add more. And then Colleen wanted more added, so those 4 or 5, whatever, got dumped in there, and yeah, those reports sat in the unsafe folder for over a year.
And that was
So
when...
that's where, restructuring this and potentially fine could make it to where because I was at that meeting when he was trying to figure out why it was so long.
Right.
How come I'm just being notified now?
Well, there was him, and then there was the other older gentleman who was like, you should see it now, it's way worse.
Yeah.
Because we hadn't been out
Except when we
there.
had like a rope pulling it up or
Yeah,
something?
because a chain, because we
Yeah.
hadn't been out there for a year.
Right. It seems part of that problem is we couldn't add new ones because the old ones were just going month to month to month to month, like,
So-
Mr. Blanton that got, pushed down the road, and Mr. Parrott that keeps getting pushed down the, and it's just, nothing's moving forward, and, here we are for an hour and a half, and,
Nothing's happened.
right.
Exactly.
So where's the master list? Where's the list of all of the properties you've done reports on? It has to be more than that.
I think
In the shared unsafe folder,
though, with the exception of 2,
2 that I just did this week, or last week.
How many are on there, 10 or 80?
There's quite a few in that folder.
Give me a general guesstimate.
More than 10, less than 8. 20.
20.
Yeah.
So there's 20 properties that if we have received calls from citizens with concerns, you have visited, taken pictures, and done some sort of a report.
Yes.
Waiting.
Yeah.
Okay. I would like that file.
I don't know about waiting.
Waiting,
A lot
I
of them
think
are on
we've-
the active unsafe.
2. We've got currently 12 active unsafe, 7 awaiting demolition. We have our one update item that we are waiting on tax sale to finish so he can legally fix and repair his house. We have 2 unsafe reports that Tony just did that, if it's the board's pleasure, next month can be on as potential unsafe. And then we have 3 that were done pre-COVID that require updating before they can even be brought back, because
So that's
they were,
this list?
yes.
Then, but the way Tony made it sound, there's potentially more.
I have my own personal list of this garage is caved in.
So how do we get, I mean, is
There's no
that...
reports on those.
Well, because this list, the active unsafe has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, counting quickly with bad eyes. Has 12 on it. You're saying there's 20
In that folder, but everything on that.
Above and beyond that,
No.
that have,
On that list, you've got your active unsafe, you've got your awaiting demo. We've got 2 that are awaiting, the board to even look at them. And then, like you said, the pre-COVID ones that.
3, so I think altogether, all those come to about 20.
Yeah, that's all of it.
okay.
And I have a list, like I said, in my desk drawer that I'm not even touching right now because of everything that's currently on there, and that it's, I don't want to add to it.
So this is 23 on this paper right here.
Okay.
And so that's the ones that you have had reports on.
Yes.
And you have a desk drawer full of complaints that you've had, that you've not even
Not
visited yet?
necessarily complaints, it's just,
You've driven by,
right,
Yeah.
and they're, most of them are vacant.
and are those the properties that we can now say and issue a general nuisance fine
Yes.
for?
Because nothing has been done with the unsafe board, no reports have been made, no anything. They're just things that I've noticed and kept my eye on, and make sure no one's gonna pop in there and do work with no permit or whatever.
So I
I
think that's,
just looked at the pictures of December. Those buildings on the unsafe report from December are horrible. I mean, they're just.
welcome, Bob. Welcome to the party.
Yeah.
So I think ideally, Tony, though, that's the dream, is to have you guys out there, while you're out there issuing these general nuisance fines. I don't want to see them up here. I don't want to be up here
Well, it just
telling
plugs this up, so, yeah.
you what?
It just plugs this up, it plugs up the whole process.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so if we can catch, especially the garages and things like that, where those people are, now there's a fund created and ordinances and everything around it that makes sense for you to issue a general nuisance fine.
Sure.
That money is coming back into our non-reverting fund, where then we are able to use it for these big things, coupled with doing some sort of foreclosure process on the properties that make sense, obviously. I mean,
And the other thing, Heather, that'd be remiss if we didn't add, is there's some liens out there that I know we've done at least probably 4 or 5 of them. I'm pretty sure at least one of them sold a tax sale. There are others that I have no idea what the status is.
so we could potentially
There's a
foreclose.
possibility that there are those properties that could be foreclosed upon.
How many of those do you think that there are? I'll give you Tony's, 2 or 80?
Less than that, I'd say it's 5 or less.
Okay,
That would potentially be, but all of those that we have done the liens on in the past are, those costs are $6,000 to $8,000.
$6,000 to $8,000.
6 to 8.
6 to 8, no, I'm sorry, I mispronounced. $6,000 to $8,000 of money that we already have out.
Per house.
For legal fees
Yeah.
or for demo fees?
The-
Legal fees generally aren't included, but it's for the processing costs for the town, gas, manpower, equipment rental or equipment usage, dumpsters,
Okay.
all that stuff.
So what would the cost be at this point to take those, say 5 properties and just look into, it's pretty easy to find out if it's got a mortgage.
Yeah, it's just a matter of
or
going
not.
back through and figuring out which ones we filed on and just checking to see that those properties are still owned by that person. The other, theory on the lien is if these people were ever to transfer them, we'd be paid at closing, but I've never gotten a call on one of those happening
Okay.
either.
So is that something worth looking into?
It's not gonna take me much time.
And then
All
we
I have
would-
to do is go back through our old files and figure out which ones they were.
We would find out in that handful if there's anything worth foreclosing on.
Yeah. I can have that information for you by next month.
What would happen if somebody signed an agreement to let us tear down their house and they sell the property and a new owner buys the property, then would you have to get the new owner to sign off?
Like in the meantime?
No, say
So
John Doe.
you are gonna sell me your house,
Okay,
and you, before selling it to me, you've agreed to allow the town to knock it down. But then you sell it to me, and then the question is, do you then need me to agree to knock it down, or can the town enforce it?
right.
That's a good question, Bob.
Well,
Now-
didn't we have, wasn't this like a Pamela Broadway situation?
Well, kind of. Now, I think the response to that, and all of this goes back to money, right? Something that can be done when you have an unsafe order is it can be recorded. It's not something the board has ever done in the past, but we've had some discussions about it somewhat recently, that these orders can be recorded, but property owners also have the obligation, when they're selling a property, to inform the new purchaser that this order is in place. Now, that's a little bit different than the circumstance you're talking about, Bob, and this, sorry I'm talking in circles a little bit, but this is a policy question for this board. In the past, the way some of these items have been handled is there was almost, I hate to call it a volunteering, but maybe the board was a little quick on the trigger when it comes to saying, well, we can knock it down.
Yeah.
And it's something that the three of you need to consider if that's something that even wants to be brought up to these folks. Because usually the way the discussions have occurred in the past, whether you heard it or not, was, you know, you're probably going to have to pay somebody $10,000 or $12,000 to do it, or we can do it, and it's probably going to be cheaper. So if it's you, and they're sitting up here saying, well, you know, you're going to spend 12 if you go out and find, you know, ABC wrecking to do it, or the town will do it for 7. Which are you going to take?
Go with 7.
Well, and I also never like that suggestion, because what that means is that we're taking it down on our dime, on our taxpayer dime, and then we're going to file a lien to protect ourselves for that $7,000, but you can hold that property for the next 15 years.
That's why this is a policy decision, Heather. I
was
have my
never
own
on board
thoughts,
with
but-
that, ever. That made absolutely no sense to me to suggest that. What's the threat behind it? Any smart person sitting there would say, okay, sign me up.
Precisely
Take it
my
down
point.
at your
And that's, if you go through the active ones, 2 Mogans, Hebner was on there. I mean, there's 3 right there.
Lomberger.
Lomberger, is that the one over on Hilltop?
Yeah.
The Mogan, we actually didn't, we had already done the initial order and then the affirming order, so we
Yeah, and then
actually
he was
did
just kind of like, yeah, you can take it
Yeah,
down.
he just kind of agreed and we just did the affirming
But
order.
the way the discussion always went was whether the order was entered or we had 2 of these folks that actually said, yeah, come in and knock it down. The discussion seemed to center quite frequently on cost, right? And you're going to pay X dollars, or we can probably knock it down cheaper. And that's for you guys to decide how you want to handle that in the future, but as, you know, Bob and I have just demonstrated, any rational, reasonable person is going to say, if you guys can do it for $5K less, sign me up for that. And then there's no teeth to it, right? It's not, well, then we're going to lien the heck out of your property and then take it, right?
Well, I also
Which is
don't
what
like-
we can do.
I don't like that, because the reason that we're able to do it for less is because any company has insurance and,
Sure.
equipment insurance and whatever, all these other fees that they're including in their fee. So we might charge $7,000 because we're gonna send Public Works over there, but ABC Construction is charging $10 because they're wrapping up all their insurance and cost of equipment and all these other costs.
And profit.
And
The
profit.
town's not profiting,
Which, all of that makes sense as a business.
but the town is not in the business of knocking houses down.
We shouldn't.
And, you know, for the ones that they are knocking down, there is no profit. In fact, as we've talked about tonight, it's a net loss. Like, the second the property's knocked down, the birdhouse, I mean, you just flush that money down. Right, along with the others that have been knocked down over the years, right? None of that money's come back.
One
So,
that I'm aware of from my
well,
time.
maybe one.
We had one unsafe bill actually get paid And that was because the person actually did end up selling his property. And because they contacted the town to find out whether any liens or outstanding fees, when it closed at closing, the title company made out a check to the town for the entirety of the unsafe bill.
That lien would be recorded on the title work, right?
It's a judgment lien, yeah. So when they do judgment searches,
So where'd that money go?
General. That's the one thing is with the creation of an unsafe non-reverting is we can also then put it to our any unsafe bill can go into that fund. So that when, if and when somebody actually does pay their unsafe bill and we're not liening it, when that fund comes in, I'm receiving it into that appropriate line, and it's not going to general, it's actually going into that non-reverting fund.
Right.
Okay.
who knew there was so much to digest in an hour?
Yeah, that's why I said Jeff and I, we got a lot of catching up to do. But I say so for February, that was
21st?
21st, we'll just proceed as what this one would have been then, right?
Well, wait though, because what I heard earlier was that as of February 20th, which would be the next town council meeting, correct?
They have a special one next week, one February 6th and one February 20th, if I remember the meeting schedule correctly.
What I heard is that we can get the wheels in motion for bringing up the non-reverting
Right,
fund at that meeting
yes.
and calling it the general nuisance fine to put in that non-reverting fund.
It'd be amending the ordinance that sort of codified the nuisance violation.
And I heard that that can be done on the 20th.
Right, but that doesn't stop us from conducting the meeting though, right, on the current active unsafe.
Well, we'll be here, that'll be on the 21st,
On
correct?
the 21st is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, we still plan on having February 21st meeting as scheduled.
That's what I heard as well.
Okay,
I just want to make sure we get on
I
the
just,
20th for the town
absolutely,
council.
yeah.
Hopefully nothing goes wrong and gets on the agenda. I mean, that's where it's gotta be, for it to take place.
So our direction to our town council representative, as the board,
Yes.
is to get that taken care of, wheels in motion on the 20th, February 20th. That way we can start getting those fines on the 21st, 22nd, what's better for you?
Hey, it's, whenever the town folks can get out there and issue them, then,
But if on the 20th, town council is able to make that vote, that goes into place then?
yeah, I mean, the ordinance will be effective immediately.
And so then on the
Upon
21st or whenever Tony's got some extra time on his hands with his guys, he can go out there and start
We just
finding.
need procedures, I mean, are there going to be forms, are there gonna be, like, we're issuing tickets, I mean, what's?
Yeah, I mean, probably,
So,
you get like the ticket pad, just like code enforcement has.
exciting.
It would be.
You know what's exciting is the thought of not having to look at as many horrible
Yeah,
buildings that are falling apart, causing potential damage
most are vacant.
to others.
Any more?
Good to me, we think that.
As new information for the newer unsafe board members, last year, I believe, or end of 2023, or 2022, I can't remember how long ago now, I worked with our IT director to have created a unsafe database, and in that database, any of our active items get plugged in. He has it set up to where the unsafe board can be provided weekly, bi-weekly, monthly updates from that unsafe database about any communications that the unsafe owner may have had. Say they give me a call and I make a note in the unsafe database, had a phone call with property owner X from property 123 Broadway regarding their unsafe property. They'll be at the next unsafe meeting.
I feel that would help us out greatly, other than, finding out, 5 days, 4 days before our next meeting, and trying to soak everything up and digest it, you know, before the meeting.
So then the
Yeah.
thought process would be just how frequently would you like to get it? Monthly, weekly, monthly, bi-weekly? What would be, whatever, take some time, think about it, and let me know what you feel would be, how frequently you would like to get an update from that update.
It would be an update via email?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would think weekly.
Weekly, I would think.
It'd be easier to look at a couple of things weekly than, pages on pages every month.
Yeah.
Ashley, does all the town council members get this unsafe, package with the pictures?
I have, at the start of this year, updated and amended all my packet and mailing lists so that all council members receive all packets from any of the boards that I serve.
Very good, because these pictures, the rest of them need to see them.
Yes, I agree.
So moving forward, any future unsafe agendas and packets, they will be receiving the Friday prior to, unless we change when packets and agendas go out for unsafe. That'll be another policy discussion to have. Right now it's set up the Friday before. They'll be getting that as well.
And keep in mind, Bob, spread the word. Some of those pictures are over a year old,
Yeah.
so.
And it's still in that same condition.
Or worse.
According to one of our citizens who flat out just said, you should see it now. So,
Ashley, where could I get those? Because I don't have access to those pictures, do I?
I can send you, kind of a packet of all of our current active unsafe.
Okay, that'd be good.
That way you have a copy of it.
That'd be good, thank you.
And Rich, I think we have a couple of minutes. Obviously, you and Jeff are both new to this commission. If you guys are okay with it, I'll take like 2 minutes and just sort of summarize sort of how the process is, because that's one loop that's never really been closed tonight, and I don't know what information you guys have or don't have. So, sort of going back to Tony's role, right? Tony will go out there however the call comes in, right? Tony goes out, issues the unsafe report. The unsafe report says the property is unsafe. It ends up on the agenda. Typically, notices to appear are sent to the property owners, so they're at least notified before the process really gets going. After a meeting or two, if they don't appear, generally the way it's gone in the past is we are directed to run title work on the property, because we have to know who to notify of a potential unsafe demolition order. Once we have that back, the board in the past has directed us to, prepare the unsafe demolition or the demolition order, and it's a two-step process. So just because it's called an order of demolition doesn't mean it's the end-all, be-all. It's actually the first step. So the first step is issuing the order of demolition. Then that requires the property owner, and the body of the order, and this is mostly from the statute, it says you have until X day to demolish the property or to correct the unsafe condition. 100 times out of 100, since I've been sitting here, nobody's done it in accordance with the unsafe order. So that necessitates a second hearing, which will give the property owner another opportunity to appear the following month to either come in and say, we're working on it, I'm trying to find someone, or in most circumstances, when we've got to that point, nobody appears. When that happens, what's called an affirmation order is entered, and it's usually signed off on by Tony. Notice of all those orders are sent to the property owners. And once that affirmation order is entered, then it goes into sort of the demo pot. So that's sort of how we get from beginning to end. But there are 2 orders that have to be entered. So folks have at least 2 opportunities to appear. They're usually given at least 1 or 2 notices in advance of that. So, they have ample notice of what's going on and chances to come in to talk to you guys to try to explain what's going on or what their plans are for the property.
Okay. Is that something that you can possibly put in written?
You want to like a memo summarizing?
Yeah, basically just for Jeff and I, so I don't have to, because I wasn't gonna write everything down right now.
I got you.
And other than that, I'd watch, rewatch the meeting and take my own notes. It'd be easier if you just, wrote it out that way to us.
That's fine.
And another process that has been done is once this gets to you as a potential unsafe, the board decides that, yes, it is unsafe, let's proceed forward. The board then directs me to send notification to whoever is listed as the property owner. I send it out two ways. I send it out via USPS and I send it out via certified mail, because sometimes I'll get the certified back uncollected, and sometimes I'll get the first class back uncollected, but I'll get the green card back. Sometimes I'll get them both back, not collected. So that way there's two sets of mailings that goes out same time, to the same place, to the same person, advising them that their presence is requested at X Unsafe meeting. And then however often the Unsafe Board directs me to send out notices, that's how often I send out notices.
Okay. Anything else, Jeff?
No, I'm good.
You good?
I'm good.
All right.
Ooh, me.
Sorry, no good. I was looking around the room.
It's all right. As you start putting these, or we start putting these fines together, something that kind of came to mind is, as was the case with the house on Hilltop, he got a permit to repair that house, and just sat on it for a year and did nothing. We did not renew it then, and it became an unsafe property. My concern would be that these people a lot of the repairs are going to be permittable repairs. So the permits are typically good for 12 months. If someone gets a fine and they're required to make some repairs, is this going to be hey, you got 12 months to do this, or is it going to be a limited term so they can't kick the can down the road as typically happens, or we'll need to kind of think about some direction on that too.
Okay. All right, sounds good.
A lot of questions.
Yeah, all right, it is 6:50.